Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we have made it past the trade deadline here in the 2044 season. It is Monday, August 1st, and we've got about 2 months till the end of the regular season. And hopefully we'll be making a 17th consecutive postseason appearance with this Buffalo Wings franchise. And as we get ready for these final couple months of the season, I want to talk about a couple of topics that came up in the comments to the last episode. And they're kind of interrelated topics. First is Deshaun Seifu, the living legend, and many of you want us to be giving him more playing time. After a slow start to the year, he's been moved to a platoon role where he's only starting against left-handed pitchers for the last couple of months at this point. You can see it's been a rough year, 226 batting average, 67 WRC plus, and more than half a win below replacement level. At this point in his career, although Seifu is still a great influence in the clubhouse, and he still actually has a lot of his speed and his bunting ability. He is a below-average hitter, and he is a brutal fielder. And as much as I'd love to try to get him to some big milestones in his career, as I'm anticipating this is probably his last season, with the way our team is positioned, as much as I'd love to help Seifu get some career milestones, since he's been part of this team for 19 years at this point, I've decided I'm going to try to do what's right for the team, and that means not playing him against right-handed pitching. Because as we sit here on August 1st, we've got a 3-game lead on the Expos for the National League East title. We've got a 3-game lead on the Expos for the best record in the National League. And we are tied with the Cleveland Guardians and the Kansas City Royals for the best record in baseball. So it's conceivable that we can put ourselves in a position where we'll have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. And granted, there have been years that we've had incredible regular seasons and gotten bounced in the playoffs. And we've won World Series when we haven't had the best record in baseball. So there's no guarantees. But on paper or on the computer screen, putting self in a position where we're going to be playing as many postseason games at home as possible is ultimately the goal. And playing Deshaun Seifu, who I don't even think it's arguable at this point. Playing Deshaun Seifu, who I believe is the worst position player on our 26-man roster at this point. Playing him against right-handed pitching just doesn't give us the best chance to win with this team. But I totally get the desire to play Seifu because he is close to a lot of really cool things in his career. You look at runs in his career at this point, and he's only 44 away from 1,800. And he could conceivably, if he was playing every day, possibly get by Yaz to be in the top 20 overall. You look at his career hits, and he's only 35 away from 3,200. And he could move further up in the top 20 all-time in that category. You look at his career stolen bases, and Ricky's the only one ahead of him, and he's only 12 away from 1,300. and only 18 away from only being 100 away from Ricky Henderson and his likely unbreakable record. And the doubles and triples are even more interesting. At this point, he's 9 doubles away from 700 in his career, number 5 on the all-time list. The only ones ahead of him, Tris Speaker, Pete Rose, Stan Musial, and Ty Cobb. That's pretty lofty company there in the 700 double club. And the triples are even more ridiculous. He's 4 away from 200. And the most recent players with over 200 triples, Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker, finished their careers in 1928. So the career that Seifu has put together is really unique in this day and age of baseball. And although I'd love to see him hit some of those round numbers, I don't think it really changes his ultimate Hall of Fame case in this game. And while it would be kind of cool, as I mentioned, I think that the team's better without him in the starting lineup right now. And since there's a lot that we're still playing for, that's the way I'm going to approach these last couple months of the season. Now, I do hold out hope that perhaps we clinch home field advantage with some time to go in the playoffs, and or we at least know what spot we're locked into, so we can maybe give him more playing time down the stretch when there's nothing to be playing for. Because particularly, you look at this, September 26th, we begin a 4-game homestand against Pittsburgh, and then we finish up September 30th through October 2nd with 3 home games against the Marlins. So we've got our last 7 games of the season at home, and it would be great for the theoretical home fans of Buffalo to be able to give Seifu a potential send-off with him in the lineup for all 7 of those games. So hopefully, knowing where we're going to be in the playoff race by that point, we'll be able to get him a little more playing time. I don't know if it's going to be enough to have him hit any of those round numbers that we just talked about, but at least get to see what he can do in what will likely be his final regular season games in Buffalo, and quite possibly his final regular season games in the majors. And some of you have also brought up a point which I can't argue with, that if I'm trying to win now, why is Jim Reichert still in the minors? It's a fair question. I think the best answer is if I bring him up on September 1st after the rosters expand to 30 players, I don't have to make a extremely difficult decision. As much as I think that Seifu is the weakest player on our roster, I don't want to release him. So we're going to put Mr. Reichert onto the 40-man roster before the end of August. So even if we don't call him up until September 1st, he'll be eligible for the playoffs. But if I were to bring up Reichert now, the responsible thing from a winning and a team-building perspective would be to cut Deshaun Seifu. And I don't have the heart to do that. So in a perfect world, I honestly wouldn't mind if Seifu pulled a Mike Schmidt or a Ken Griffey Jr., and he just decided to walk away in the middle of the season because his performance was not up to his standards, and or he didn't want to be a distraction to his teammates. But I've never experienced that in OOTP before, so I'm not anticipating that that will happen. The other way that I could maybe get Riker up here earlier would be if we do have an injury. Not that I'm hoping for an injury to any of these players, but if we do have an injury and we need to put a position player on the IL in the coming weeks, that could be an opportunity to get Riker up earlier. Because as much as I just talked about not wanting to play Seifu to maximize where we're going to go in the standings, if we really want to maximize where we're going to go in the standings, the move would be to bring up Riker and to cut Seifu today. But that, for me, is still a bridge too far. So appreciate all the thoughts on what we should do. Walked you through kind of my thought process. I'm not going to claim that it's necessarily logically consistent or perfectly intellectually defensible, because although I appreciate the virtual Deshaun Seifu enough to not cut him from the team, I don't appreciate the virtual Deshaun Seifu enough to continue to have him in the lineup. I'm a complicated man myself. So with the trade deadline behind us and my thoughts on Seifu as he prepares for the end of his career and Riker as he prepares for the beginning of his major league career shared and out there, it's time to kind of start moving forward, and we'll see if maybe we can clinch things early enough that we can get Seifu some extra playing time towards the end of September, particularly in those final games of the season. As a Yankees fan, I do kind of like the symmetry of this. It's kind of similar to 1995 with the New York Yankees when Derek Jeter came up at the end of the year and Don Mattingly was in the final year of his underrated major league career. And they had that connection and crossover. And we may be seeing something similar with the likes of Seifu and Riker with the Buffalo Wings here in 2044. And we've simmed ahead a couple weeks to the middle of August. Playing pretty good. Took 2 out of 3 against Colorado, 2 out of 3 at Pittsburgh. We swept the Mets at Citi Field. And then we did just lose 2 out of 3 at home against Atlanta. But we're making some progress with our goals. Magic number down to 43 in the NL East, although the lead over the Expos has shrunk to 2.5 at this point. And we're a game behind the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So everything that we talked about earlier is still in play another couple months further into the season. You can see Daniel Rojas, the veteran first baseman, now ranks 3rd in the National League in OPS and 2nd in batter WAR. We've had no thoughts at all of bringing him back as a 38-year-old next season when he finishes up his 4-year, $120 million contract, particularly with guys like Riker waiting in the minors. But if we don't bring him back, it's going to leave a pretty big hole in the lineup. And similarly, our longtime ace, Alexis Barajas, leads the National League with 15 wins and is second with a 2.54 ERA. And Barajas has the ability to opt out of his $20 million contract next year, which I'm suspicious that he may do. So the 3 most accomplished players on our team, Barajas, Rojas, and Seifu, all quite possibly in their final years with the team. And Barajas and Rojas going out really strong. Seifu, not so much. And separately from those 2 players, Joe Scott is leading the National League in saves. And Jim Lance, who's taken over for Barajas as our number 1 starter this year, even though I did just call Barajas our ace, is 3rd in the National League in pitcher WAR. So the season's going well. And we're only a couple of weeks away from potentially seeing Mr. Reichert and others making their major league debuts. And we've simmed ahead another couple weeks and continue to win the majority of our series. We took 2 out of 3 in Texas. We swept the Brewers in a 3-game series at home. We took 3 out of 4 at home against Washington. And then we did just lose 2 out of 3 against the Mets at home. But playing very well, just 2 games left on the road in Philadelphia here in the month of August before we get to September call-ups. Despite the good baseball that we've been playing, we can't shake the Expos. They're still only 2.5 games behind us in the battle for both the NL East and the best record in the National League. And we're still a game behind the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So not too much has changed. We have here on August 29th made 3 roster moves to potentially help us prepare for the postseason. As I had talked about, we've added Reichert to the 40-man roster. We're going to wait another 3 days to call him up. But he's been a monster in AAA for us. 328 average, 15 homers in 198 at-bats, 158 WRC plus. And you look at his numbers here, and he is clearly ready for Major League ball. And he'll be with us in a couple of days. And he'll be in the starting lineup with us in a couple of days. But I do think that giving him this additional season with the big investment that we have in player development in the minors, as well as the big investment we have in real good coaches in the minors, has definitely paid off. Because if you look back to what he was before the season started, we think he's gained 10 points in his contact, and we think his potential is 5 points higher than we thought it was before. He's gained 15 points in his power, and we think his potential is 5 points higher than it was before. His eye hasn't changed at all. We think his defense is a little better than it was. So it's been extremely positive for his development, and he looks like an even bigger and better player than we thought he might be when we picked him up. And who knows if that development would have happened exactly the same way at the major league level. We've also added Jim Coles, the starting pitcher, to the 40-man. He is going to be a September call-up, 13-9 with a 4.21 ERA, his first full year in AAA, although he got a good taste of Albany last year. 24 years old also, wants to be in the majors, and he will be on September 1st, but we want to keep the flexibility if we decide when all is said and done that we need him on the postseason roster. That'll be an option too. And the last one is a little bit of a surprise since he only recently got promoted to Double-A, but we've added Josh Fuchs, or more accurately, Fuchs, to the 40-man roster as well. I don't necessarily see him being a September call-up, but it's possible that he will be. But given his excellent defense, I do want to at least maintain the flexibility to consider him as our shortstop. Hit .264 with 8 homers and 144 at-bats in high A ball, 105 WRC plus, so he was not dominant there. But we still did a couple weeks ago promote him to Double-A Utica, and he's hitting .302 there with a 147 WRC plus. He has not made as major strides as Reichert has this year. You can see his contact is still the same as before the season. His power is still the same. But his eye has actually gotten a little better, and his defense has gotten materially better. I don't think, looking at his .40 contact and his .40 home run power and his .45 I and his .35 avoid strikeouts that he's really ready to handle major league pitching. But his glove is definitely ready for the major leagues. I don't think he's on the playoff roster unless we have some injuries. But if a Whitehead or a Ferguson or a Contreras gets hurt, want to at least have the option to think about Mr. Fuchs and his outstanding glove for the postseason. And given that he's now fully developed at shortstop, we'll start playing him at some other positions. I think you look at those ratings, and it certainly screams shortstop to me, but who knows? Maybe we end up with a even better defensive shortstop down the line, and we need Fuchs to play second. So we'll try getting him ready to be as diverse defensively as possible in these last few days and weeks of the minor league season. And we're going to have some decisions to make as far as who to bring up, although some of those decisions, as we've talked about, are going to be pretty easy. Alexis Barajas just won the NL Pitcher of the Month, 4-1 with a 1.30 ERA. He, at the age of 35, certainly as we see him sitting here with a 16-2 record and a 2.49 ERA, has the potential to maybe earn the second Cy Young Award of his career 8 years after the first. His pitcher WAR of 2.7 is not really all that impressive, but some of the stats that voters will look at in terms of the wins in the ERA, he is right up there in the National League leaders. And as the month of September begins, still a wide range of outcomes, pretty reasonable. Our lead over the Expos in the NL East is only 2 games. Now the Expos have a 9.5 game lead on the fourth and final wild card spot, which 3 teams are actually tied for right now. So pretty confident that we're going to be in the playoffs, but it is conceivable we could slip all the way to a wild card rather than a division title and a first round bye. But right now, if the season were to end today, we'd have the best record in the National League as well as our NL East title. And we're only half a game behind the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So with just a little over a month to go, anything is still reasonable to think about. Taking a look at our roster expansion, and we've added 2 pitchers. We brought back Juan Castaneda, who was the unlucky guy who got sent down to Albany when we made the trade for the left-hander Kevin Hale. And then we also brought up Jim Coles, the young right-hander. We're going to see what he can do in the majors this year. We're going to give him more usage than often as a middle reliever. We're not going to put him into the rotation yet, but with the potential for Barajas to opt out of his contract and Eric Barbarito also a potential free agent, we could have multiple spots in our rotation open up next year, so it'll be good to see what Coles can do at the major league level. And we've also brought up a couple of position players, not surprisingly, Jim Reichert. And Reichert is going to go right into our lineup as our number 3 hitter and left fielder against right-handed pitching, and our number 5 hitter and left fielder against left-handed pitching. But we've also brought up Fuchs, only 13 games at Double-A Utica. And as I talked about not that long ago, looking at his bat, I don't think he's quite ready for the majors. You can see that he's made a little progress in the handful of games that he's played at second base for us in AAA and learning that position, but that will be more a project for spring training next year. But if there's a chance that we're going to want Fuchs or consider Fuchs for the postseason roster. We might as well see what he can actually do as an everyday player. So as a left-handed hitter, he's going to be our starting shortstop against right-handed pitching. Whitehead has kind of left the door open for him. He's hit 266 this year, and the 84 WRC plus has been fine for a shortstop, but his defensive skills aren't what we thought they were at the start of the season. He's a little over a win above replacement, but as a fielder, he's been a slightly below average defensive shortstop this year. And we've also given Danny Ferguson in recent weeks, particularly a little more action at shortstop, where he's also been below average, well below average in terms of his defensive efficiency. So Ferguson has put up a 91 WRC plus, so he's been a pretty useful offensive player for us for a middle infielder. But the door is open for Fuchs if he is able to hit it all. He clearly has the best glove, and given that we are a pitching and defense type oriented team, we're going to at least see what he can do in the month of September, and maybe he'll earn himself a spot on the playoff roster. Last thing we're going to do before we start simming through this last month of the season is check in on Mr. Seifu and see what he did in the month of August. Not a lot of action, unfortunately, for Mr. Seifu. He did hit 333, so he's hit over 300 2 consecutive months now when he's only been starting against left-handed pitching. Unfortunately, we didn't play against a lot of lefties. He was just 7 for 21, one more double, and 3 stolen bases during the month. So as we take a look at his career stats, still 8 doubles and 4 triples away from those benchmarks that we talked about, given that he's got 9 doubles and 4 triples through the first 5 months of the season, and he's playing less than he ever has. I think it's pretty unlikely he'll hit either of those benchmarks. And the first couple weeks of the month of September have gone pretty well. We did lose the final game of the series on the road at Philadelphia, but then we took 3 straight on the road against the Twins. We swept the Astros at home, and then we just took 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers at home. So now we are about to begin a very long road trip for the next 2 weeks. Looks like 13 games over the course of 2 weeks on the road before we finish up with those 7 home games. So 3 weeks left in the regular season, or a little less than 3 weeks left in the regular season at this point. With that 8-2 record in our last 10 games, we now have a 5.5 game lead on the Expos. Our magic number is down to 15. We've already clinched a playoff spot, and we're 5.5 up on the Expos for the best record in the NL, and we're now 2 games up on the Guardians for the best record in baseball. So hopefully we can keep everyone healthy these last couple weeks of the season, and maybe we'll be in a position where we can get Mr. Seifu a little extra playing time that final homestand of the season, and possibly the final homestand of his regular season career. And I had done the math in my head wrong. We hadn't officially clinched a playoff spot back when I was talking about it almost a week ago in game time. But today we did clinch a playoff spot. Still have a battle going in the NL East, though. The Expos 5.5 behind, still lurking. Our magic number is 9. Unfortunately, Jim Reichert just got banged up. Fortunately, it's not a serious injury, but going to be out for 4 days with a sore back. He is, not surprisingly, given his impressive batting ratings, been a force in his first few weeks in the majors, hitting .328 with 5 homers and 61 at-bats, 148 WRC plus. Looking very forward to seeing what Reichert will do with this team in the coming years. Gives us a guy to be in the middle of our lineup, hopefully for the next 10 or 15 seasons, who He's going to be probably as good as anyone we've had in that role since Chamar Jenneret in the prime of his career. And we've had some good results from the Buffalo Wings on that long road trip. We did lose 2 out of 3 in St. Louis, but then we swept a 3-game series in Cincinnati, took 3 out of 4 at Atlanta, and we even took 2 out of 3 on the road against the Expos, who are our closest rival in the NL East. So that leaves us with 7 games to go, 4 at home against Pittsburgh, and then 3 at home against Miami before the regular season is over. At this point, our magic number is 1, so we're close to clinching the NL East, which will also clinch the best record in the National League and home field advantage for as long as we're alive in the NL playoffs for us. But at this point, we're 3 games up on the Guardians for the best record in baseball, so not ready to get Seifu back into the lineup yet. Fortunately for us, the Guardians have lost 4 in a row. We were right with them as far as the best record in baseball. I'd like to get Seifu a little extra playing time in some of those final home games, but I'm not going to do it until we've locked up the best record in baseball. Feel like that's the responsible thing to do. Feel like we do have a team that could end up winning a championship this year with the best record in baseball right now. We've got on paper or on the computer screen as good a chance as anyone to do it. And I want to ensure that we'll have home field advantage for as long as we are alive in the playoffs this season. And unfortunately, we lost the first game in the homestand in 11 innings to Pittsburgh, and both Montreal and Cleveland also won. So magic number still 1 for us in the NL East, and we're only up 2 on the Guardians for the best record in baseball. And the pesky last place Pirates with the worst record in the National League are making things challenging for us. They beat us in extra innings for a second straight game. This one went to 12 innings. So that's probably not a great sign for the sharpness of our bullpen as we're getting ready for the playoffs. Montreal did lose, so we have clinched the NL East, and we've clinched the best record in the National League. But Cleveland won again. So we're only 1 game up on the Guardians for the best record in baseball. And with 96 wins, the Royals could conceivably track us down soon. Would love to get that 100th win and end up splitting this series with Pittsburgh with 2 straight wins, because that could put us in a situation where we could really let the fans spend the last 3 games of the season over the final weekend of the season cheering on Deshaun Seifu for possibly the last time in a Buffalo uniform. And we did fortunately bounce back after losing both of those 1-run games in extra innings to the last place Pirates to kind of exert our dominance with 12-1 and 11-3 victories in the last 2 games. So 3 games left. We are 101-58. The Guardians are 99-60. So it's conceivable that we could be ready to play Seifu. Well, it looks like we're going up against a lefty in Game 2 of the series anyways, so we'll be playing him then. And then hopefully we'll have clinched the best record in baseball by Sunday the 2nd, and we'll be able to play him on the final game of the regular season. And we did get a win against Miami on the last day of September, going against the left-hander Weichel today, so Seifu will be in the lineup. We still have not clinched the best record in baseball because Cleveland also won. Hopefully either we'll win today or they'll lose today, and we can get Seifu in the lineup for game 162 regardless. I honestly think even if we're only 1 game up on them and we're facing a right-handed pitcher, kind of have to play Seifu in what could be the final regular season game of his in Buffalo. Kind of interesting here in the Mail and News, the top National League reliever was David Rivera. You may remember that name. He was the guy who was the centerpiece of the trade that brought us Brenton Burrill over the offseason, who ended up being the centerpiece of the trade that brought us Reichert before the season even started. So Rivera, mixed results this year as Colorado's closer. 13 losses, but he does have 37 saves, 4.44 ERA. Hasn't been the type of season I would have expected. You can see he was much more effective in terms of his ERA and his Sierras in his time in Buffalo than he was in Colorado this year. But good to see him win the National League Pitcher of the Month. We're pretty happy that the decision to move on from him ultimately resulted in us adding Reichert and Fuchs into our farm system, even though there were a lot of other players that we had to give up to make those things happen. And we did get a win yesterday against Miami to clinch the best record in baseball. Let's go see what Seifu did. 0 for 3, 247 batting average on the year, so he has pulled his batting average up a bit, playing only or primarily against left-handed pitchers. We're going to put him in the lineup for this final game of the season back in his traditional leadoff spot and see if maybe Mr. Seifu can go out with style in what will likely be the final home game during the regular season of his long and storied major league career. And we won the final game of the regular season. Let's check in and see what Seifu did. 0 for 5, so that dipped the batting average down to 243. Struck out a couple of times, and he left 5 batters on base. I think Seifu will be on our playoff roster. He still has been in our starting lineup against left-handed pitching. You know, we take a look at his ratings, and certainly not great against left-handed pitching, but better than he is against right-handed pitching at this point in his career. Take a look at his batting splits, and in the months of September and October, he hit 382 again in September, so he does seem to have been rejuvenated a bit by the fact that he's been primarily facing left-handed pitching, and of course 0 for 8 in the 2 games that we've checked on in October. But for the season, he hit 204 against right-handed pitching, but he was still productive with a 303 average and a 117 WRC plus against left-handed pitching. We'll see whether or not he retires at the end of this season. We certainly will not be picking up his team option for $6 million, but it's going to be hard for me to have him play for another team if he doesn't retire. And given that he's still been productive against left-handed pitching, you could argue you bring him back as a platoon player, given his excellent speed and his great influence in the clubhouse. The issue is that he's not really a good enough offensive player to justify the fact that he is a brutal defensive player at this point. Just kind of scary, bad infield ratings for a guy who did win a couple of Gold Gloves at the beginning of his career. But we finished the season very well when all was said and done. Took the NL East by 8 games over the Expos. Also had the best record in the National League by 8 games over the Expos. Finished the year with 5 straight wins, 2 games better than the Guardians. So we are going to have home field advantage for as long as we're alive in the playoffs. Taking a look at the leaderboard, Barajas ended up tied for the league lead in wins with 18, third in the National League in ERA, and Joe Scott with 51 saves leads the National League this year. Take a quick look at our team statistics, and we ended up third in the National League in runs scored, and you can see we're in the top handful of teams in a lot of offensive categories when all was said and done. Good base running team, excellent defensive team, first in defensive efficiency and zone rating, and we're in the top 3 in every pitching category. Most importantly, first in the National League in runs allowed. So ended up being a pretty potent combination of pitching and offense when all was said and done. Our 104 wins, 3 below Pythagorean expectations. And after that slow start, 11-13 in April, and only a 500 record at the end of May, put together 769, 629, 703, 714, and 1,000 winning percentages in the last 4 real months of the season, plus October. So feeling like we are a competitive team that certainly should be in the mix to win it all this year. But we're going to have some interesting decisions to make as far as our playoff roster. You can see that our manager has already made some decisions, including taking our number 4 starter off of the playoff roster. Jim Coles, don't know that we can justify putting him on the playoff roster. He was 2-0 for us, but a 5.79 ERA with 5 home runs allowed over 9 1/3 innings. So not exactly the start that we hoped he would have as a major leaguer. We know already that Reichert had been playing really well, and I guess he slowed down a little bit, but still hit .311 with 6 homers and 19 ribbies in his first 103 major league at-bats. Put up a 132 WRC plus. As we've talked about, hope he will be in the Wings lineup for as long as we continue to play here in OOTP 24. Only a few months away from the release of OOTP 25, and I think the thought is we'll probably have Reichert for as long as we keep playing. The big thing to check in now is how did Fuchs and his 40 contact, 40 power, and 35 avoid strikeouts, but his great defense do in the majors over his first month as a major leaguer, and will he give us something to think about as far as perhaps being on the postseason roster and possibly even our starting shortstop. And it was pretty rough. Hit just a .169, no home runs in 77 at-bats, a brutal 28 WRC plus, and despite his great glove, he was a below replacement level type player. So I think that probably gives us the answer. Although Whitehead hasn't been great defensively, still put up a 1.8 WAR on the season as our primary shortstop. Ferguson put up a 97 WRC plus and a 2.5 WAR as our second baseman. I guess conceivably I could make an argument that maybe we put Fuchs onto the team as a defensive substitute, and given that we do typically cut the roster to 12 pitchers from 13 and move up to 14 position players from 13 for the playoffs with all the off days, I guess maybe there is an argument that even if we're not going to start Fuchs at shortstop, we could have him as a defensive substitute to maybe help come in the late innings and help us secure some victories. So something to think about if you've got thoughts on what we should do as far as the playoff roster. Always helpful for me to hear what the loyal viewers and even the not so loyal viewers are thinking about our decision making and what our plan should be. And we'll find out what these Buffalo Wings, including some of these young players and including the old man, Deshaun Seifu, can do in the playoffs this year in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.